Focal Point, Episode 5, where Chelsea is back and we have Dan Baker here to help us discuss community over competition.
So today we have Dan Baker with us. Dan is a street photographer based on the English seacoast who does a lot of work with other photographers and photo walks and so forth. So we thought he'd be a great guest to have on our community over competition episode. So thank you, Dan, for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. Quite excited to be on this and look forward to digging into this conversation.
Absolutely. So why don't we just jump right into it then? So let's talk about it. Why is community so important in what is ultimately a pretty solitary hobby or profession, depending on where you land? What are your thoughts on that, Dan?
So I think the whole thing with street photography, and like you've already just pointed out, it is a solitary pursuit, probably like 95% of the time. And that can get quite lonely. I definitely find it can be lonely, especially if you're and we all go through it, a bit of a rut with your work. I mean, if you're in the middle of, if you're flowing through something at the time, it's not so bad. But sometimes it's nice just to have almost like a safety net, a catch net of a community around you that you can bounce ideas off. And that's something where I live here in the on the English coast, as you said. I very rarely have the opportunity to actually see other photographers around and about. I'm somewhat isolated here. So I think it's really important to be able to actually put something together and get that community in. And it's something that I found I missed from when I did my degree. We had that community of photographers around us and other creatives as well as that. From there, we all graduated and everyone went off in different directions. And I headed back up to the northeast coast where I was somewhat isolated. And I craved that community, that spirit of creativity. And it's something that I think is missing sometimes when we undertake projects. And even just a case to just show people what we're up to. That's devolved of Instagram or any other social media. I think it's nice to be off of those platforms at times to be able to actually have that face-to-face conversation and an open and honest conversation as well, which it's hard to do when you're texting somebody at 3 p.m. You're just not going to have the same interaction.
Yeah, I think a lot of times people, when they hear community over competition, their mind immediately goes to Instagram and online groups and social media platforms and such. But I think you make a good point that the face-to-face community has so much value. And I think what you brought up was an interesting point because it's something that people say a lot. They say, well, I don't live in New York. I don't live in London. I don't live in Hong Kong. I'm all alone here in my small town and there's no other photographers. You've seemed to to combat that in a pretty successful way. Do you have any thoughts on how other people in a similar situation can find a community in their already small community?
So I think some of that is down to the fact that we do have these very powerful tools now, and that is social media, and we can utilize them for our own means. I know obviously we think we are all the time, and there's a lot of negativity around that at times because we assume that because our work has flopped online or it's not getting enough attention, that it's a reflection on who we are, but it's not. But if we flip it on the head and we use these platforms for what they originally were intended for, it's social media. We can be social with it and we can find these people that are in the same position. And trust me, there is a lot of people out there that are in exactly the same position as we all are, somewhat isolated. Even the ones that, and I found this quite interesting, friends that are in cities, and you would assume that they're the ones that have this community around them. And quite often, these are some of the more isolated individuals that I've come across because they feel somewhat cast out from whatever the collective group is. But I think it's all psychological at the end of the day. And I think just to be able to get those people together and have the impact of social media to be able to have this collective voice and then take that offline is quite a powerful thing.
And that does bring up, like, how do you go about building these communities if there isn't one already to join in?
Well, I guess for me, it's a case of you start each thing as anything else. It's little steps, isn't it? I started off very small, and you reach out and you find somebody else that's like-minded, and they become an acquaintance or a friend, or you have maybe some other friends that are maybe a little bit further away, and then you can start having this open, honest conversation online. And then it can start to grow. And I think some of that as well is what you can do through social media is you can talk to people and you can comment on work, and you can actually dive a little deeper than a little love heart or a that's nice comment. I mean, if you are able to actually just talk to people and have that conversation, it's amazing what it leads to. But most people don't. Most people just, I don't have time for you. So why would they have time for me? You know, if I don't put myself out there, why am I expecting anything back? And that's something that, you know, it's a simple thing, but I think in all our busy lives, we don't often think about this. We don't think about the impact of just taking that time to interact honestly with other people around us.
Yeah, what you said there really resonated with me because it comes to the point where people are consumers by nature more so than they are creators. So they come in and they're like, well, I want this community. Why aren't you giving me this community? And they're not putting any effort into it. And this is something that I've run into quite a bit because of the communities that I try to maintain, where there's maybe thousands of people there, but 3 or 4 people putting in a lot of effort. And those 3 or 4 people who are putting in a lot of effort are the ones who are getting the most back from it. So this idea, if you really want this strong community, you have to be willing to put in the work as well. And you should never go into these communities with, what is this going to do for me? And that's it. It should be, how is this community going to be healthy? And it's going to help me whilst helping other people, which will then create this beautiful, like, constant give and take, as opposed to a take.
Yeah, I definitely feel that.
And it is challenging sometimes to get people to start that interaction and keep it going. I think that's a little bit easier when people are actually there together in person. But even then, sometimes there's always the shy person in the group, usually me, but getting everyone to actually start getting involved and communicating with the group can sometimes be a little bit of a challenge. Do you really have any good solutions to something like that, and like how to help people start getting more involved and keep them encouraged?
Personally, I find it's just, you will get people that are a little bit quieter, and I've definitely come across some in the communities that I've been a part of, and I'm still a part of, that find it a little bit more difficult. And I suppose this is why a lot of us are maybe drawn to this solitary pursuit of documentary or street or any type of photography, because it is a solitary pursuit. But I think it's a case of, you just have to be yourself and have those honest interactions with people. And it is amazing how many other like-minded people are out there. And say you're not the most outgoing person in the world, guess what? There is a million other people, not that many, that don't want to be outgoing people, but they still want a connection as much as I do or anyone else does. It might just be on a different level. I like to go and talk to people. I can't help myself but stick my nose in other people's business and go, oh, what are you up to? What camera are you shooting with? What are you guys doing? What are you producing? Where's your work? Let's see it. Let's get involved with it. I'm all about that. And I've seen other people sort of recoil in horror that I've even approached them to speak to them, especially Londoners, which is quite interesting because to say they are surrounded by people, they do not like being poked and prodded. Whereas there's quite a lot of the northern folk in the UK. We're very vocal. We go and say hello to people, and we're quite friendly. So I take that approach, but obviously there are the people that don't want that approach, and there is other people like that. So just having the opportunity to, think that there's more than you out there, and if you struggle, there is a million other people that also struggle with this. It's just a case of you just have to get over that first hurdle of what do I do, who do I speak to, how do I reach out. The honest, easiest way to do that is just take that first step, reach out to a few people, and you will find your level within society or the creative hub or wherever that is, because it naturally falls into place. But it's just that first step. If you don't bat the ball to begin with, no one's going to return it to you.
Yeah, I think that's exactly correct. I can speak from experience because for years I was traveling, and I mean I am again, where we stay a place like a month, 2 months, no more than 3 months, and it can be kind of lonely. I have my husband and now my son with me, which is great, but it can be lonely when you have some kind of pursuit that you're passionate about and you want to be able to talk to other people about it. And after a few years of that, we moved to Prague and didn't really know anyone yet, and I definitely didn't know other photographers, but I knew that there was other people who were doing it. So that's exactly what I did. I reached out to a couple of people and that I admired their work, and I started saying, "Hey, why don't we get together? Let's call ourselves a street photography collective," because that's the jargon that goes around the internet. And we had some meetings, and then we started doing walks, and we did feedback sessions. We had a gallery showing, and all of this came from me feeling isolated, like you said, and being somewhere where I knew there had to be somebody else. And there's always somebody else. The group isn't very big, but it doesn't need to be very big. It just needs to have people that you can bounce ideas off of and do things with. Of course, that took a shot during COVID. We started in 2018, in the summer of
Oh,
2018. Uh, but it's possible to do that, and just starting small, I think, is always going to be the first step to get to something that is valuable to you and to the community.
Yeah, yeah, I feel that.
So I want to know then, like, we're talking about the community itself and how to start it. What is so valuable there? Like, what do we get from having these people around us, especially speaking to those who are maybe more introverted and um, less uh, extroverted? For lack but yeah, so what are the positives of these kinds of communities? I think if we're talking in broad strokes, it's the obvious of you have people to bounce ideas off of, but also things like feedback, things like learning new techniques or discovering new places, even in a city that you might know well. What are your guys' thoughts on that? What do you think is the biggest benefit you get from something like this?
I'll jump in here. For me, I think it's a mixture of all those things that you've mentioned. A big thing as well is seeing how others work. Um, quite for quite a while, I was somewhat working in isolation in a bit of a silo here, and especially when I first got into street photography, I didn't know how you were supposed to approach things, what you were supposed to do, and this was really before we had any major social media. Um, so I didn't really know how to approach doing certain images or how photographers were able to achieve these like iconic frames. And I'm looking at them, and you're scratching your head, and you just assume they walk past something, it just happens in front of them, and they click the shutter, and it's one shot, they've got it, they walk on. That was my
That's it.
mindset for years, and I
If
can't. It
only.
boggles my head. How was I so naive to this? But I didn't know. There was no way of
Uh,
me sort of
yeah.
finding out, um, and then all of a sudden you figure out a few more techniques and things like that, and you start building your own way of approaching things, because of course I was still sort of somewhat siloed at the time. But now we have social media, and we have these connections with people. We're able to just sit and look and watch. And every day's a school day, especially for me. And if I invite people to come and share this community, share this space with me here at the seaside, I watch how others interact with people, how they interact with scenes, how they shoot. I find it quite fascinating. I had a friend that came over a few weeks ago, Ben Story, fantastic, very talented photographer. He shoots things differently to what I do. He uses the same camera system and he approaches things somewhat similar. We both like a certain aesthetic. But I was watching what he was doing. It was completely different to how I would photograph this environment. And I was a little bit unsure what the final results was going to be. He was shooting film, so I couldn't actually see the images. I knew they would be good. But then when he got his film scans back and he showed me some of the images, I was really impressed, and I could see the connection then between what he was doing, how he's approaching subjects and things, and the final result. Even to the point where he stood on top of there was a big bin in the street, and he stood on top of that. He climbed up on it. I've never considered climbing up on something to get that high to be able to get a vantage point. I do stand on things, but I watched him do it, and I was thinking, if he falls off, he's going to hurt himself, because that's pretty high, and it's got a slippery slope on it. But the result was, it was fantastic, and it was a scene of there's a fairground that I photographed quite a lot on the beach, and I've never seen it from that vantage point before, and it's made me think maybe I need to get a lot higher. Maybe I need to like climb on top of a car or something to be able to get some of these frames that would be a completely different vantage point and a different perspective.
Just start carrying a ladder with you.
Exactly. Can you imagine that? I mean, I'd get some funny looks, but I get funny looks anyway. I don't really care. But yeah, I think it's important to be able to see all this sort of stuff, and it's learning every day. Like I said, every day is a school day, and we're always learning new things, and seeing how others work is just as important as having that conversation and having that moral support around you as well.
Absolutely.
I think that works really well for getting that feedback too, like having this group of people that you can go to and that you know and can trust, that you can bring your photos to, and you can honestly have that open conversation and sit there, talk about the good, the bad, and especially for an in-person community, like they may have been with you when you're out there shooting, so they may be able to help direct and that type of stuff too. And you can pull from each other's experience that way. Just kind of sitting there giving each other critique feedback on the pictures. And it doesn't have to be a competitive, well, my stuff's better than yours, but it can be that open and honest. It's like, hey, yeah, let's work and improve together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the problems that a lot of people fall into is it's an ego thing. It's a hubris thing. It's well, how am I supposed to learn from this guy? Like, I know I'm better than this guy. And then you start comparing everything that you do to the other people, and it just becomes this constant, like, I don't want to say race to the bottom, because that's not necessarily what it is, but it's just this often, it's very toxic, because then you're not thinking about yourself and how you're going to approach things the way that you want to. You're thinking about, well, what can I do to be better than the person next to me? And that toxicity of the competition is just going to have a negative impact on any of the work that you do. And I do think this comes up a lot when people are maybe in a commercial setting, or, maybe portrait photographers in a town or something like that. But there's the other side to that coin, where, let's say, for example, you're a wedding photographer or a portrait photographer, and God forbid something terrible happens the day you have a shoot. Like, if you have completely isolated yourself and put yourself on an island, then what are you supposed to do? You don't have anyone to lean on. You don't have anyone to fall back on. It's as simple as, like, I can get some coverage, or I need to borrow a lens. If you have that community that you've built there, then this competition of, if you're in the business side of it, it's nothing but harmful for you. It's better to think of the other people as your colleagues, I think, than your competition when you're in the business side of it.
Yeah, I've seen that plenty with the business side, especially in online communities. This is where it tends to take place more. But they'll sit there and it's like they're trying to be a competitor to everyone else out there, when the reality of it is there's more people out there wanting pictures than there are photographers. So there's always going to be room for more people out there. Just because you've got some newer photographers coming in, it's not necessarily going to take away from your own business. And that competition on the business side really can drive that race to the bottom mentality. People are always like, well, I've got to do something to undercut these other people instead of focusing on improving themselves and improving each other. So instead of trying to bring the other people up, you sit there and drive yourself to the bottom. And it's not a sustainable business practice doing it that way.
Yeah, and even in the creative aspect of it, I mean, I hate to go back to like high school Brit Lit, but I think John Donne said it when he said, "No man is an island. If you make yourself an island, you are without a safety net. You have no way to progress in a, I think, in a constructive way, um, both in your creative side and in the business side of it, for sure."
Now, I will say there are some instances when I think competition can be good and used as a tool for improvement, but it's more on the personal level, like doing those art exhibitions and contests and stuff like that. If you can go into it with the mentality not of, I'm going to be better than everyone else, but I'm going to see how good I can be. So are there any other kind of challenges and competition type things where you can see or where you can use it as a way to build up that community?
I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and I think it's a case of just pushing yourself to be as good as you can be. And that is really, it really is important, because without that, and I've seen people graduate through this process of starting off and everything being very loose, and they're not particularly producing their best work or the work that they potentially could do if they put some more time and effort and attention into the craft of photography. There's a process that you go through, and I think the only competition you should be in is the competition with yourself to be able to produce the best work that you can do. If you can do that, and you can avoid looking at everybody else around you and seeing what they're doing, and even trying to compete with the success of others, because that's you're onto a hiding every time that you get into that headspace, because you're never going to be as the same or in the same lane as anybody else, because that's their own lane. You're in yours, and your ability to produce stuff or your successes will come when they're ready. And sometimes that's years into your creative journey. And trust me, I've been doing this for quite a few years, and it's only at this point now that I'm able to host meetups and things like that. I've been scratching my head for like 15 years trying to get to this point, but then I've seen some other people around me that have arrived very quickly. In the space of 2 years, 3 years, they have produced something which is quite meaningful, but they've done it in their own honest way. They've not tried to undercut anyone or to copy, but they've just pushed themselves. They've been their own biggest supporter. And when I see somebody doing that, I support them as well, because I see that growth from them. And I don't want to go, well, hang fire a minute, you're surpassing me. I want to go, keep going. You're shooting for the stars, and I want to see you become what you can be. From whatever the work is that you can produce. I want to see it. I want to see it out there. I want to see it on the front pages of whatever magazine, newspaper, print it can be, or in the best gallery that you can get it in. I want to see that, and I want to wish them well. And I think there's a certain amount of congratulating people and pushing them forward that relieves that tension of wanting to compete with them. But then again, I say this, I'm the least competitive person ever. I hate competition to the point where, and it's to my detriment, I avoid entering competitions and putting my work out there, because I hate the judging of things and waiting and will I get something? So I probably should do. And I tell people you should, push yourself forward, but then I don't listen to my own advice. I just stay by the wayside and I just do my own thing. But you know what? That works for me. And that's what I need to do to be able to stay in my lane and push myself forward and produce the best work that I can produce at this time. I don't know. It might change in the future. Who knows?
You touched on a couple things that I think are really important, and I just want to kind of compress them because I think they're really indeedly like just very important, like I said. But the idea of building other people up, that is so huge because it's it's just such a positive thing to be excited about other people's work and to see people who maybe, like you said, maybe they just started like 6 months ago and they produce something incredible, and or maybe you were mentoring them and they've surpassed you. Those are signs of a good community. That's a sign of that you're doing something right. That you can see somebody flourish in and be proud of them, and that's just a thing that I think a lot of people struggle with, um, just because of envy, I guess, is what it would boil down to in the lowest terms. But being proud of and being supportive of the people in your community can only be a positive thing for them, obviously reasons, but it would be positive for you as well because it gives you something that you can take a little bit of pride in because you know them and you're a part of their experience of getting to that point. So if you approach it from that way, as opposed to, well, I've been doing this for 30 years and they're better than me. I mean, that's just, again, just toxic thoughts that won't help anybody. So I really like that attitude of being prideful of the other people around you who may or may not be your competition, quote unquote.
I think that's probably the best way to go about things at the end of the day. It, what we are doing is effectively, and I struggle with this term, an art form, because I don't consider myself like an artist or anything like that. I think it's a bit of a weird title, especially when I see people, maybe it's like an English thing, I don't know. But when we self-proclaim we're artists, I feel like, I don't think we can award ourselves that title. So it's a bit of a weird one, but seeing people like succeed with their art form is like amazing. And because that's what it is, I suppose, at the end of the day, I mean, how many artists, like I'm thinking like painters now, I'm thinking how many painters are out there in competition? And I see like, I'm really inspired by the work of abstract surrealism. And I'm thinking like years gone past when it was their heyday of the work that they was making. Were they in competition with each other, or was they pushing each other forward? And chances are they was pushing each other forward, and they was all in their own lanes doing their own thing, and there wasn't a Rothko wasn't being copied by anyone. They was just doing their thing. And yes, of course, there'll be people that will try to imitate that, but they'll never be the original person because it's not their honest voice. They won't be able to know what the next step will be in that journey. Only the creator will know that. So I think having that as a mind, as like the forefront of your mind of what you're producing, is effectively like an art at the end of the day, and seeing other people producing their art and thinking of it like that, we're able to then step back and go, do you know what? I couldn't produce that because it's not me, it's not my voice. I can only produce what my voice is, and maybe at this point in time, my voice isn't the strongest, but I'm going to grow that, I'm going to push it forward, and I'm going to learn from what the others are doing around me. And I'm not going to copy their technique, but I'm going to imitate their route to getting where they're going. So I'm thinking, what have they done that I'm missing out on? Are they out every day shooting? Are they taking more breaks than what I am? Are they coming to it, arriving at the images from a different perspective? Maybe it's a different mental state. But it's all these things that we can learn from, rather than just going, what aperture did you shoot? What lens was that? What camera brand did you shoot that with exactly? And what time of the day was you at this exact position to be able to get that shot? Because I want to go and copy
right
that.
There.
The shot's already been taken. You're not going to copy it. And if you do, people are just like, no, it looks like a so-and-so shot. Of course it does, because that's what they've shot. You need to go and do your
that's
thing.
what it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
The social media aspect, I think, is what has caused this kind of idea of competition first. Because if we think, I mean, obviously there's always been competition, but if we think of like 1920s Paris with the salons, with F. Scott Fitzgerald hanging out with Hemingway and Gertrude Stein, and all they're doing is sitting around and talking about the latest art and the latest writing and helping each other. And Hemingway and Fitzgerald have very, very different voices, but they work together. And this is exactly what you're saying. The problem arises when people are like concerned about the amount of likes they're getting on Instagram, for example, and that kind of side of it. Side note, I stopped allowing likes to be shown. I stopped using hashtags, and my mental state is so much better with it because it doesn't, A, likes don't mean anything, but B, it does kind of then make you look, well, mine only got 100 and that guy got 200, but mine is better. I know it's so. If you are struggling with this like toxic thoughts of competition, do yourself a favor and step away from the social media, or at least find a way to lessen it in your mind, like hiding the likes, which they let you do now, and it's great for your mental health. So that's just a little side tip from me.
Do you know what? I found it quite interesting about, likes and everything else. And this was a process that I ran through myself. And it was the fact that I have produced images, and again, this is from years of experience. I've produced images that I know are successful for me. And these are the images that I
Mhm.
really, really like. And I would perhaps expect them to maybe do well. I know there's some that I really like that definitely will not do well on social media because it doesn't feed the algorithm of what the masses are wanting to consume. That is fine. But I produce some images and I think, I absolutely love this image. It's exactly where I'm at right now. And it basically sums everything up about what I'm producing. I also think this is probably going to do well on social media. It's got the right type of vibe to it or whatever. And then it'll absolutely flop. but,
Oh yeah,
but do you know
all
what?
the time,
Yeah,
constantly.
yeah. It really, really doesn't matter. Some of my favorite images that I've put out there have had like very little attention. And that is absolutely
Oh yeah.
crazy. But do you know what? That doesn't mean that I want to take them down. I want to, and I get hiding lights and things like that. But for me, I'm quite proud of it. If it's my most successful image in my head and it's the one that I love the most, and it's got 4 likes on it, I really, really do not care because do you know what? I'm super proud of that image that I put out there. And it's just a case of like holding on to that belief, holding on to the belief that you are good enough and able to go out and you can overcome whatever pitfalls that there are around you, and there will be. But I guess it comes back to, at the end of the day, who are you producing the work for? Why are you putting it out there? And these are only questions that obviously you can answer yourself. And if it's a case of that you just put it out there and it's for fun and you're not trying to achieve anything from it other than sharing it with your community, fantastic. But if you've got alternative motives, and not that that's a negative thing, some people do want to grow social media for various reasons. And you potentially could, and there are people that have made a living through doing this. But that comes with a catch. You've then got to keep doing this thing. You've got to understand what the algorithms are. You've got to understand what the masses want. And then you've got to be a slave to that.
Yep.
But if you can produce your own thing, you are completely free. And you can, if you own it,
Hmm.
you're mentally free as well. Then you can just go and be happy and do your thing. And that's, for me, probably the best place to be at.
Absolutely.
You absolutely nailed. I got it right on the head. I mean, I can speak from personal experience. There was a time when I had like 15,000 followers. I was getting thousands of likes on every picture, but I was producing stuff that I didn't really care about, like the typical travel stuff that wasn't necessarily my idiom. And it was not good for me creatively. It was not good for my mental state. And I finally one day was just like, screw this. And I went through and I like hid all the pictures that I didn't like. And I went through this really painstaking process of removing people who I knew were following me for no good reason. And then I just said, I'm just going to post what I want to post. And huge change. This was years ago. And if anyone's seen my work from like 8 years ago to today, you're going to see the huge difference. And it's exactly like Dan said. It's a headspace thing. It's a mental state thing of just, who are you doing this for? Do you want to be a slave to the algorithm and to the masses, or do you want to be producing stuff that you want to produce? And you can only answer that yourself, like you said, Dan. So we're going to look at some photos now that were submitted to us from one of our listeners, and you're going to see his Instagram and his website below. I don't want to say it wrong, but I believe it's Ami Mananev. I apologize now because it's all one word, so I'm not sure where the word break is. But we're going to look at his work now, and we're going to start with a photo of it's an extreme close-up of the profile of a woman whose hair is blowing in the wind, and she has a hoop earring with a lot of light hitting it, some backlight and some front light, some rim light. If you're watching this on YouTube, you can see the picture now. If you are listening on the podcast, please see below for the link to the image, as well as his website. So we have the tradition of the guest gets to go first. So you're welcome, Dan. It's all you.
So both of these images, I think, are really, really strong. These are typically the type of images that I'd be very drawn to. The main impact of these is the color and the grade, as well as the actual composition of the images themselves. For me, that's ticking quite a few boxes. I can't really. There is not particularly any massive negatives for me, which was. And I know this is it's got motion blur in it and everything else, and it's got a feeling and a mood to it, and that's exactly what I look for when I'm looking for images that I'm attracted to. And I found it quite interesting. There is a certain type, and I've gone through this before. I've run through a talk when I was a camera club approached me and asked me to share some of my work, and I shared work that had motion blur in it, deliberate motion blur. And it was absolutely slated because it had. But for me, it's part of the vocabulary that is the medium of photography. And I think that this has a mood, a certain ambience to it because of the movement, the light. That catch light on the gold earring is brilliant.
Oh, it's incredible.
Yeah. It's stunning. The only thing that I would potentially, and this is nitpicking, and it's only because I'm trying to balance this out with both sides of an argument. On the left hand side of this image, there is there's quite a harsh highlight. Again, this if you was looking at this from any other perspective, like say a commercial perspective, you would be looking at that and saying potentially might have lost a bit of detail there. But I get that is nitpicking. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter unless it's going out on a commercial venture. But that is the only thing, and that is not anything that I would worry about at all. And there's quite a lot of the time there is parts of images that I make that are blown out. It does not detract from it. It's the only thing I can think to mention that is anything to balance this crit with.
Yeah, because that highlight does it draws the eye towards the left of the frame, but then you also have that highlight on the earring that draws it back, and so it balances the photo out with the woman's face right there in between the two. And so technically speaking, yeah, it may not be good to have the blown out highlights, but it works in this situation.
We talked about in another critique, we talked about the definitive moment and how that can absolutely surpass everything else, the technical stuff. I am not a pixel peeper. I am not everything needs to be technically correct. He sent me his portfolio, and this picture just poof right off the page for me. And I said, I need to talk about this one. It's just, to me, it's absolutely stunning. I'm not big on the teal and orange usually, but it's so perfect here. Like, it just feels like that's the color it's so supposed to be. There's the blown out highlight on the left. Don't care. There's the thing going into her neck. Don't care. I think it's absolutely stunning, and the motion blur is gorgeous for it. It makes me feel like maybe she's on like a rickshaw going through like a really hectic, frenetic Asian city, and she's just enjoying the moment of being there. And I can't balance my critique, I guess, is what I'm trying to say, because I think I absolutely love it. Like, I would put it on a wall. I think it's stunning.
Yeah, it is one of
So
just it's a fantastic example of exactly what you mentioned, that the moment outweighs technical perfection sometimes, because it really is like, I look at this and it's a portrait of a person. You don't see the eyes. Technically,
yeah,
with portraits, you want to see
I
the
love that.
eyes. But and then where you had mentioned the motion blur, technically, yes, you generally want to try to get a shot without the blur. But it all works so well together in this shot. The rules have been broken perfectly, I think, here.
This is owning your craft. That's what that is. And the fact that
That's what it
you
is.
went on a journey with this image as well, and it took you to a place, it's told you a story, that for me is a successful image. So yeah, definitely.
I
Absolutely.
agree. Why don't we look at the other one? Let me give a little description for those listening. So here we're seeing a large like highway overpass, big cement highway overpass curving from the top left down to the like lower quadrant. And there's a silhouette of a man in the distance walking, I would say walking towards us, but that's a glass half empty, half full thing. He could be walking away. And then a little bit of a city in the background. We have the same kind of tones in this one as we did in the last, kind of the Blade Runner, teal and orange. So yeah, for me, I do like this image as well. I think it's aesthetically pleasing to look at. I think what's missing from it for me is the same kind of dynamic moment. I mean, it's beautiful, and it's very cinematic, and I can see it as a still frame in a larger picture. I think this is a great like supportive. Um, we're gonna talk about these types of shots in another podcast, but it's almost like an establishing shot or a context shot that would be great as part of a larger photo story. Um, and then I guess technically the technicalities here don't bother me either. I mean, there's a couple blown out lights, but that doesn't bother me because it kind of matches the feeling that is here. I just wish it had a little bit more of the oomph. Maybe I was just so blown away by the last one that I'm like expecting too much of someone. But maybe like a car going by or some kind of additional movement would do something for me here.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on this as well. When I look at images, and this is the same as what the process that I go through when I'm trying to make something, there's three things that I look for. Color, which this is fantastic. The color, and especially the contrast of the colors as well. The composition of the frame, and again, this is very well composed. You've got some really nice sweeping lines that lead you into that single figure. Beautifully composed image. This would look amazing in black and white, as it equally does in color, just because of that composition. And then the third thing that I always look for, and this is what you've just mentioned, is the moment. Now, for me, it's a nice. There's something there, there's something happening, but it's missing that impact of a greater moment to be maybe a stronger single image. But we don't always have to think about images as a single image, and I think you just touched on, we can think of images as a series. So this image potentially could work quite nicely as a series, and I see it sat next to the the image of the woman and the tones and everything else work beautifully together. So you could see that already starting to build a bit of a narrative there, which I'd be quite excited about, and I'd want to know what the next image in that series is going to be. But I think at the moment it's nice, but if you wanted it as a single image, perhaps it needs a little something else. Maybe, I don't know. I'm feeling like, I don't know, like an oil drum with a fire in and someone over to the left-hand side. I don't know, but then it'll mess with the composition. But you know, that just something else, or just a little twist that gives you a little bit of intrigue to it. Maybe someone just on the very far right-hand side of the frame, which just, I don't know, just tips the frame slightly just to give it a little bit, what's a bit of intrigue, what's happening there? But at the moment, the story is someone walking down the street, and as an opening for a narrative, fantastic. I'd like to see more.
It definitely is kind of that tone setting shot as opposed to kind of the hero shot. It's just the framing of it. It feels imbalanced, even though visually it is balanced. But with that kind of the bottom right corner being where kind of the brightest highlights are and the most of the orange tone is, but then that orange tone sweeps up running along the edge of the overpass, and that kind of helps balance out the frame, but it still visually looks imbalanced. And you have the person there that's offset, which kind of helps further make it feel unbalanced, like everything's happening in that right lower corner. So it gives kind of that mood of something is going on here. And as a standalone piece, if it were just this, I would say it probably feels a little unbalanced. Maybe like pan the camera right a little bit to get more off to the right and center up some of the extra elements a bit. But as you all have been talking about, where it works really well as a set, it is perfect for setting the mood. It doesn't need to be the hero shot, the one that everyone's going to sit there and stare at, but it's a supportive shot. It sets the tone and helps build up that narrative for some of the other shots. And I think this does a fantastic job with that, because it gives a little bit of that moodiness vibe, and it doesn't try to present itself as this is the perfect hero shot. It can sit there in that supporting role and make the other shots basically fit the narrative better and look even better individually when they are grouped in with this set. I kind of danced around what I'm trying to say there, but hopefully that made sense.
Yeah, definitely did.
It makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. I would say if you look at Omi's website, it's omimanev.com. So it's OMIMANAV. I'll write it down so you could see it. If you look at his work, one thing that he has going for him is a very consistent eye. I think his work often breaks the rules, often feels a little unconventional, and I think in a really beautiful way. So it's definitely worth looking at Omni's work and seeing how this image, I think when I saw this image, I saw it as a supporting image. I don't know if that was his intention, but it definitely supports the other work that he has in his repertoire. So worth looking at his things if you have the time, which you should. So thank you for the critique. Our listeners always really appreciate it. I want to see if we can finish up with maybe like a last thought on our greater topic of community. I think our critique here is a pretty good example of that, because everybody was very supportive of his work. So yeah, if you have a final thought, maybe one thing we can stitch on a pillow that you would say to people about community over competition, what would that be?
I think it's be kind and have fun. This is something I always tell people, and everything that I put out, I tend to end with that. If I'm doing a talk or a workshop or anything, that's the ending that I like to leave it on. You are like a reflection of what you put out, or however that needs to be. If you reflect positive out, you're going to get it back to you. And I think just being positive and having fun on your everyday life as much as you can do, chances are you're going to get some of that energy coming back towards you as well. So I think it's just enjoy what you're doing. Go out there and have a smile, as much as you can do.
David, you have any thoughts?
For me, I would probably say focus on the people. Get to know them. Don't make it just about photography, but get to know them as people and have those casual conversations. And that will absolutely help just give everyone that sense of belonging and make it more than just a group of people with cameras, but it'll be a group of friends.
I like that. I guess for me, my big thing would be it's rare to find people who are passionate about what you're passionate about. So you should be treasuring that as opposed to worrying about how that translates in other aspects. And so have those conversations with people who like what you like, be supportive of one another, because the more support you give out, the more you'll get in return. And you can end up creating something really special. Well, I want to say thank you again to Dan Baker for joining us. I've been a huge fan of Dan's work for years now. So it's an honor to have you here to talk to us. I really appreciate it. And thank you for all your thoughts on why we should be nice to each other, which is the crux of everything. Be nice to each other. And there's no beer to sponsor us today. It's a little early for me, unfortunately. Usually there's a random Eastern European beer, but not today. So no sponsors, unfortunately. But thank you guys for listening, and we will see you all next week.